Um, well, welcome everybody. We've been chatting already. My name is Nick Tangen. I'm the assistant to the Bishop for Faith and Neighboring at the Minneapolis Area Synod. Thanks for coming to this Learn Together over lunch. Hope you either had some lunch already or have something tasty in front of you. Um, as many of you know, at our Synod Assembly last May, we passed a resolution on immigration that called on the Synod to create an immigration task force to identify opportunities to fundraise and support ministries working with immigrant populations and for mutual aid, and to support the Synod's public voice on issues related to immigration. And so today, in that spirit, we're joined by two folks from Churchwide working with Amparo, the ELCA's strategy for accompanying migrants, who are going to talk to us a bit about the ELCA's social statements and messages on immigration and the work of Churchwide with migrant communities. And so we're joined today by Kate Parsons, who is the Migration Policy Advisor for ELCA's Witness in Society Office, where she supports advocacy in favor of just and humane U.S. immigration policy, as well as the federal policy work of Amparo. She has a master's in international development from American University and a decade of experience in policy, advocacy, and humanitarian work, including 4 years in Honduras and 3 years in USAID's humanitarian response roster. So welcome, Kate. And we're also joined by Raed AbuJries, who serves as the program manager for Amparo's U.S. network, education and communication. He was born and raised in Bethlehem, Palestine, and after high school, immigrated to the U.S. and studied communication at the University of Nebraska. After a decade of living in the US, he returned to work in Palestine and worked with a number of international organizations in the field of communication and advocating for marginalized groups before joining the Amparo team in May of 2023. He lives now in Houston, Texas, with his wife and two children. So welcome, Raed. And we'll hand it off to you and Liz. Why don't you let us know when you want us to pull the slides up, and we'll kind of go from there. So Kate and Raed, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for the welcome. You can go ahead and bring the slides up. I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Raed to finish us out. So I am Kate Parsons, like you said. I'm based in Washington, D.C., but the Twin Cities it's one of my favorite places. My in-laws live just outside St. Paul in White Bear Lake. So I'm up there quite a lot. Unfortunately, usually at Christmas, which is really, I would say, not the best time for experiencing the Twin Cities. I have my own parka that just lives at my in-laws' house because, well, you all know. But I'm really grateful to be here. And for this invitation to really dive deeper into the immigration social teaching and how it informs my work in advocacy. I started with the ELCA's Witness in Society office just this past summer. And I come from a faith background. I attend Episcopalian church, but this was my first introduction to ELCA social teaching. And I found it so helpful to walk in and ask, well, what do you all believe about this? How does your faith inform our advocacy on this issue? And to be handed a stack of papers that I can use as reference that speak to not just how this church currently sees the issue of immigration, but how it has consistently seen and acted on this important issue over the past 50 plus years. So if you want to go to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the immigration social statements that I reference every day, how it informs my advocacy, and then I'll turn it over to Raed to talk about how that intersects with the broader Amparo strategy and how you all can get involved if you aren't already. Next slide, please. So the primary social message on immigration came out in 1998, and this is, again, something that you'll often see quoted in the action alerts we send out or in the messages from the presiding bishop. And I tried to boil it down into one unwieldy sentence. I'll just read it out. The message says that as members of a church with immigrants and with roots in immigrant churches in a nation of immigrants, we believe that hospitality for the uprooted is a way to live out the biblical call to love the neighbor in response to God's love in Jesus Christ. And this belief leads us both to minister with the most vulnerable of the newcomers and to advocate for immigration, refugee, and asylum laws that are fair and generous. This is really the fundamental heart of the social message. And if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about what this looks like in practice. The immigration social message cites an earlier statement that dates all the way back to 1969, a statement on immigration policies, moral issues, and national interest, which goes back to the Lutheran Council in the USA. And this statement said that the church supports an immigration law that is fair and generous. And it spells out a few examples of what that looks like, what that means. They said they want the United States to admit people to reunify families, to admit workers who have special skills and capacities for the US economy, to admit refugees, and specifically framing this as the US's international responsibility. This is coming out of our compassion for those who have been displaced, but also our understanding that the US, like many other countries, must assume our share of this burden. And then the framing is we want to admit people without bias to race, national origin, religion, and with respect for their human rights. You know, if you look back at the history of immigration policy, there have been many different policies that have tried to exclude people because of the country that they're from, because of their race. And so for 50 plus years, this church has been standing against that bias. And then finally, that statement highlights that we stand for a path to citizenship for permanent residents. We oppose this permanent limbo that many workers and members of our communities find themselves in. And I wanted to include this throwback slide because sometimes we face an accusation that we are assuming these policies because they're progressive policies or because we're just being swayed by whatever's in the news at the moment. And so I think it's an important and powerful witness to say, no, we've been consistently calling for these things, for just and fair and generous law since 1969 and even before that. If you go to the next slide. Next. The immigration statement from 1998 goes into a bit more detail. Some things have not changed, other things had changed between the 60s and the 90s. But just digging a little bit more into what that statement clarifies as priorities for immigration advocacy, it again uplifts the process for citizenship, addressing the backlog and making the process for applying for citizenship reasonable and effective and short. It calls for benefits for permanent resident. And this is something that remains timely. We've seen how refugees and other people who have been invited to the United States with a legal status have been stripped from eligibility for SNAP and other social welfare programs. So again, continuing this call for advocacy. The 1998 statement also calls for flexible and humane ways for people without documentation to adjust their legal status. That's a fight we're continuing to fight today. It calls to increase the number of refugees, and again, objecting to discrimination based on race and national origin, to welcome asylum seekers consistently and humanely. And then this framing, I think, is helpful and important. We recognize the right of countries to control their borders, and we call for respect for human dignity as people are trying to cross. So, and this is something, especially when I'm going into a meeting with a more conservative member of Congress, for example, who says, well, you just want open borders and no laws. We can say, no, we think it's in everybody's interest to have clear and just and fair and consistent laws. Our concern is not that there are laws, but that the laws are not treating people fairly and with dignity. If you go to the next slide. The next social message that I wanted to highlight is a social policy resolution that came out in 2009 toward compassionate, just, and wise immigration reform. And this, very much building on the foundation of these other statements, continues by saying that this church acknowledges the rule of law and the role of government in facilitating orderly migration and integration, and in preventing migration that might be dangerous or harmful to host communities. This is again a baseline. We're saying we do not oppose immigration law. There's no but here, but I hear the but here. But the law must be just. Governance must be good. Enforcement must be humane. And this statement, I think, is also valuable today because it highlights how, particularly post 9/11, immigration issues have been increasingly viewed through the lens of national security, resulting in false characterizations of unauthorized immigrants and names immigration raids and detention and their impact in leading to fear and trauma and inhumane treatment in our community. I don't know whether it's more encouraging or discouraging to read these messages from 10, 30, 50 years ago and say, there's not too many words that I would change. If you go to the next slide. Just continuing in that statement, the church in that resolution resolves that we will be urging the US government to prioritize family reunification. Again, that common thread, we want to keep families together. Calls for legislation that provides legal pathways for workers, protects the rights of people at work, insists on just and humane enforcement, including the right to legal counsel, calls for ongoing support for the US Refugee Resettlement Program, and then adds, I think, this important focus that was not included in the other that looks at the root causes of migration and acknowledges the US obligation to serve the common global good. So if you go to the next slide, we are rooted in all of these issues when we set our advocacy priorities for every Congress. One session of Congress, we're in the 119th right now, runs for 2 years. And so our high-level priorities for this Congress, you'll just have to click for each one to appear. Sorry to be asking that. Oh, I don't know what happened to, we go back one.
There's supposed to be little bullet points.
They are supposed to be bullet points. Let me share my own screen. Can I do that?
Yep.
I think I sent you a version that doesn't have that slide.
Yep.
Thanks for your patience here.
I also could pull up just the
All right.
PDF.
Can you see that? Perfect.
Oh, yep. I
Okay.
can see it.
So again, you guys are, going to see these patterns, going to get bored of hearing the same thing over and over again, but we are advocating to the US Congress to ensure stable families and communities, to maintain a safe and orderly border, to oppose mass deportation, to respect human dignity, and to protect vulnerable women, children, refugees, and asylum seekers. And how we do that, we have meetings, we draft emails, we make phone calls, and we write letters to members of Congress and their staff. We do that as members of our office, and we do that in collaboration with constituents. You've seen our action alerts. You may have also gotten individual outreach. Sometimes, for example, we might want to get a Minnesota senator to host a hearing or something like that, and you might get direct outreach with us. Sometimes it originates with us. Sometimes it originates with a synod saying, we want to do more for refugees or for temporary protected status recipients or for this family who our church is supporting. And your outreach to us can help frame messages for advocacy. So the things we ask Congress for, there's the bread and butter of advocacy work: introduce, co-sponsor, or vote for or against laws and legislation. This Congress has been a little different, as you're all aware from the news. Not a lot of legislation is moving, but that doesn't mean that we're out of things to ask for. There's lots of other ways we can engage Congress. We ask them to exclude or include funding in appropriations bills, saying more money for oversight of ICE, less money for enforcement of ICE, as one example. We may ask members of Congress to speak out, to make a public statement in favor or opposing something. We don't always have great access to the decision makers in DHS or in the administration, but Congress does, or at least should have a better way of reaching out to them. So some of our action alerts you'll see is us asking Congress to ask the administration to do something or to stop doing something. We can ask Congress to hold a public hearing that helps get some of these stories and impacts on the record. And we're also doing work to ask Congress to exert their oversight. So Congress has the power of the purse. They decide how much money should be spent and where it should be spent. And the administration is accountable to Congress in answering for how that money is spent. And one really concrete way is that members of Congress have been visiting ICE detention facilities to confirm what the conditions are like. And we have been doing advocacy saying, keep sending your staff, keep showing up, even when you're turned away. This is your role as a member of Congress to ensure that they are respecting the human rights and dignity of people who are detained. And I just wanted to give a shout out also to everyone here, because whether you know it or not, we use you in this work. In every single meeting I go into, I say, I'm with the ELCA, and we have X number of congregations, X number of baptized members in your district. And that immediately situates us as a constituent organization, not just a lobbyist, walking by with our own interests. When people say, I have so many amazing postcards that people have signed from their congregations. And I'm planning just this week to send some emails and request meetings on refugee resettlement numbers. And my hook is, hey, I've got 50 postcards from your constituents about their concern for immigrants. Can I come by and drop them off and have a conversation with you? And that really helps with access to being able to do some of this advocacy. We share stories of impact, action, and conviction that come out of your communities. Your action alerts and calls demonstrate that constituent support. And ultimately, the members that we're meeting with are accountable to you. They need to be reelected by you. And so your voice is particularly powerful as we're having these conversations. So that's just a snapshot of the social messages and how that connects to advocacy work. But the Amparo strategy goes beyond advocacy. So I'm going to turn it now to Raed to finish off our presentation by talking about the other 3 core areas of Amparo. And Raed, if you're all right, I'll just keep sharing my screen.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you all for having us today. I wanted to share, similar to what Kate mentioned, my first experience with the ELCA, the first event I attended after I joined Amparo was in Minneapolis. I was invited to speak to, I think it was the missionary orientation. And there was, I'm trying to remember the event that was happening at the same time in Minneapolis. There was a big gathering, and I got to meet the presiding bishop then and a lot of the folks there. So it was this like drinking out of a fire hose. I met so many people, and I got to, you know, understand some of the complexities of the ELCA. So in my heart, I will always like, Minneapolis is going to have a special place for me, uh, introducing me to this work. And it continued so because of um, the amount of impact and the amount of activities and the amount of interest that we receive in communications. So I will always be grateful, and I appreciate having us today. Um, so what I wanted to talk about today is just give an overview of what we do in Amparo and how um, obviously one huge part of it was advocacy that Kate highlighted, and I'll show you how that fits within the rest of our strategy. So Amparo is, this is the strategy that's that the ELCA chose to represent it for migrant ministry. It's definitely rooted in our faith. It starts, I mean, even the name, um, God is our refuge and strength from Psalm 46. In Spanish, it says refuge is amparo. It's spelled differently, but this is basically the inspiration comes from that. And it started in 2016. It was adopted at the 2016 Churchwide Assembly as a response to the increased migration of Central American minors. Back then, the focus was mainly on that. that started previously in 2011. And since 2022, Amparo has expanded and extended its focus, and now it became the ELCA's official global migration strategy. We could go to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Perfect. Thank you. So, our work in general is guided by four guidelines, let's say, or four principles. We call them the four A's. First one is accompaniment. Accompaniment means the actual walking alongside migrants, whether providing psychosocial support, legal services, spiritual care, any type of humanitarian aid. So the accompaniment is the walking alongside the migrants. The second one is advocacy, and you've heard Kate speak about it, and it's basically, um, it's a comprehensive strategy in order to advocate for fair, compassionate, and just migration policies at all levels, and it involves all let's say uh, expressions of the church. The third one is the awareness building, and that's basically the how we try to educate ELCA members and the public about the root causes of migration, the realities of migration, and the challenges within our system. The last one, articulation, and I really don't want to confuse you here because when we think of articulation, it probably makes more sense in Spanish, and it's the work of fostering alliances and networks, that our companions can work together on. Basically, this networking component is very unique to our strategy, and it's the way we work specifically outside of the U.S. and in the U.S. as well, but mainly outside of the U.S. through articulating with existing companions on the ground. Let's see if we go to yes. So this is the map of the US. This is our network, the US network of Amparo. And as of recent figures, we have 266 congregations as part of the Welcoming Congregation Network. 33 of them are in Minnesota. It just shows, how many, the involvement and the lot of work, and something to be happy and proud of. Right now we have work in 60 synods, which means we're covering the majority of the synods. We have 5 more to tackle. And basically our understanding has developed and has grown, and we're working on, addressing the root causes, but the strategy adopted is, we call it, Amparo Global now. And so in the US, we work through the congregations and the synods and the committees. Everybody works in their own way, and we can go further into that, but basically there are different levels of involvement. But on the U.S. side, becoming part of the Welcoming Congregation U.S. network allows you to connect with this, vast network that has a lot of members in all over the country, and we learn from each other. There's a lot of exchange, but also there's also a side of it that we can also help a little bit with some of the expenses through our grants. I guess if you don't mind going to the next one, what do we do? I touched a little bit on this. What does it mean to be a welcoming congregation? It really means committing to one of these to these 4 commitments: to spiritually accompany migrants, which means being the supportive presence, physically accompany them. That's through the medical, legal, and other local services needed. Praying for justice for migrants. It comes without saying. It's who we are as a church, and advocating for justice. And that's something that you've heard about, but it's these four commitments. It does not have to be, doesn't need to be like providing financial support or offering an actual shelter. It could be just being a church or a home to support um, migrants, to become a welcoming congregation. Uh, yes, and another way of involvement, and it's something that we're actively working on expanding, this year and next year. It's the Guardian Angel program. It's basically, um, um, you know, it's an example of how local accompaniment works. Um, Basically, it was it started in Chicago, but it provides spiritual and physical accompaniment for unaccompanied migrant children or families that are going through the immigration court process. Uh, it requires English-speaking volunteers to document, the proceedings, and just the mere presence of someone from the church provides a lot of um, s- support. People feel more safe, but also just the presence of the church allows for more transparency, um, and it's something that requires a little bit of training at the beginning to join this program, but it's not a big commitment, but it has a really big impact. Next, okay. So we talked a little bit about the U.S. network, what Amparo does locally. And and mentioned that in 2022, Amparo became this global strategy, and it started expanding. And one of the things was that right now we have 21 companions in 17 countries. Um, Many in Latin America, but we also have some in Europe, in the Middle East, North Africa, and in Asia Pacific. And so the work has expanded and it has adapted based on the needs of each region. Um, like I mentioned, we work through companions, and definitely in some of the areas, it's done through our area desk through the Global Mission uh, department. Sorry. In Latin America specifically, it's basically with this picture that we see right now. Those are some of the people that I got the pleasure of meeting, but also um, they represent some of they bring me hope just to hear their stories and what they've been through, what they have done, and the transformation that they are doing in their communities because of Amparo companions. Each one of these people has attempted at least once to come to the United States. Some of them succeeded to come in, but were deported. Some did not. And so our effort in these countries right now is to allow them to reintegrate. Many of them require some psychosocial support, going through trauma of the migrant journey. Um, Initially it starts with that, but then we see what kind of things they would like to work on, and they receive some financial support, but also training. And so it's just a really great way of how our companions work on the ground. And it's one thing there's this misconception that I face sometimes when talking to congregations that, why are we um, basically encouraging migration? That's never been part of the strategy. As a church, we meet our neighbors whatever they are. If they are in the country, we step up and we walk with them. but also in the country of origin. And so if our support means helping them stay in their communities, then this is what we're doing. It's not. So I think this part of our ministry could be highlighted even more to show what the church is capable of doing through our companions. I think we have time to show a little video if that's okay. Yeah. Is it okay if I share it from my computer here? All right. It's basically I wanted to show some of our active members in the U.S. What it really means to them to be a welcoming congregation. It's a short video. Oh, okay. I'm a little confused because it's a little different than what we use. Okay. I wonder if I need to open the video first and share it as opposed to play it within. Okay, I'll do that. Oops.
Or if you want to send us a link, we can always open it here too.
Okay. Because it's on, pardon me, because it's on my computer. Here we go. Share sound.
We're part of a big network. It's called Emparo. And there's all these churches across the country, all these people that are working on this.
So it's not a migrant ministry where we are here, the church, doing ministry to you over there. Migrant people, immigrants, undocumented people, asylum seekers are members of our community, valued members of our community, and we accompany them and we walk along them in our church.
It felt kind of risky. Take the risk of saying, yes, we're going to dive into this unknown thing as a community of people really not knowing what it's going to look like or mean or take or go.
And usually when we've tried to start this kind of ministry in a church, it takes about 5 or 6 weeks to get people on board. It took 2 years at Messiah. And it was so much resistance. I mean, it was the most frustrating time we've ever had the congregation.
I have never, I've been a pastor now for 35 years, and I've always had pretty challenging calls, and I have never been as tired in my work, but I also have never been as energized.
This kind of ministry, this hands-on, face-to-face, it's just a world of difference. And it just transforms people and transforms congregations.
It's like I lived in one world, and then all of a sudden the next day I lived in a different world.
Wow.
And I can't go back now. Not that I would want to, but you really can't unsee this once you've started to see it.
Like, I can't look at them and not see Christ and be like, well, I need a place to stay, and I heard that you might have one.
But there's opportunity in that. And the opportunity is that there are many families that are going to need help. They're going to need advice. They're going to need counsel. And I think there's plenty of space for congregations that want to be engaged.
We are with you. That's important. You feel that you had one family, because we are the God family. God is our Father, and you are my sister, my brother, and we are with you.
There's one thing, you can collect toothbrushes and you can collect socks. But when you actually have a family and you hear their story, it's a whole different ministry. That's what making the difference.
Thanks for putting that video together and for sharing it.
Thank you.
I'd love to just hear from the folks on the call now I mean, we probably should have asked this at the top, but how are you already engaged in the Amparo Network, in migrant ministries, and how can this team be of support to you in that work? Of course, if you have any questions, happy to respond to those as well.
Well, I can speak for my congregation. We are very new to all this. So we don't have a migrant ministry or a ministry partner. We're just starting to kind of lean in and learn more at the Synod Toolkit Assembly. And so I hadn't been familiar with Amparo at all in the past. So this is very helpful to understand and kind of looking forward to figuring out ways that our congregation might learn more path to engagement.
And we'd love to be there and supportive in every, step of that. We'd love to, in any capacity that you need us to help with, would love to be there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have questions or examples of how you're living out these social teachings in your context?
I can say for the Synod, we've had over the years a number of ways that we've engaged this work. We've had kind of specifically an Amparo team here on the Synod that has gone through some iterations, and now kind of the primary work is being held by this immigration task force that was developed by this resolution that we passed in May. So a couple things that are forthcoming from that. One is that we're working right now to develop what we're calling a welcome fund. So some dollars that we're raising across the Synod that are going to be available for mutual aid, but also then for to support folks who are navigating the immigration system in one way, shape, or another. And we've already got a good head start on that. And so there should be some more fundraising info coming in the new year. But then we're also always trying to think about, as the Synod, in particular as the bishop's office, like where and how we use our public voice and show up. We've in the past participated in things like working to get driver's licenses for all here in Minnesota, which passed in 2023. The creation of defense funds, immigration defense funds at the county level, which was quite helpful. And I think one of the questions I always have, or one of the things it's both been helpful for me, and I'm always thinking, or always have more questions about, is like in your in your dreams, how do you imagine congregations using these social statements that we have? I mean, these are moments where our church has said collectively, this is kind of where we stand. But I find for a lot of our congregations, they still sometimes feel like, gosh, we really don't know where to start speaking out about these things. How do you kind of envision congregations, especially using these documents?
That's a really great question. And I think that the social statements can be an antidote to this partisan split that we're seeing, where people are taking their news and forming their opinions first from the media ecosystems that they're in, and then bringing that mindset to church. And we have an alternate framework where we said, look, here are these values that are coming out of values that are 2,000 years old, but that have been refined and, shaped by theologians who are deep in the study of Bible first, faith first, expression of, Jesus's ministry first. And we're going to take that as our starting point as we enter the media landscapes that we're in on the left or the right. And so I would hope that churches where there's maybe some division or disagreement on how we should be responding, that's sort of the purpose of some of these social messaging, right? Is to let's find the common ground. And there's disagreements over some of the nuts and bolts of how exactly we get to these policies. But can we all agree that immigrants have this dignity, that they're made in the image of God, that we want families to stay together, that we want our nation to protect and welcome people seeking refuge. And I hope that that can be a starting point for then the more messy conversations that come. Well, okay, now what do we do with this? As opposed to starting so far apart that it's hard to even know how you can move forward together. Raed, is there anything you would add to that?
No, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say it any other way, but it's specifically at this time of, the time where we live, this polarizing political atmosphere. When we have a concrete message that we can all agree on, it's something that definitely unites us, but allows us to see that what we do in our ministries is not based on our individual way of thinking, but it's rooted in our faith that's being explained or being interpreted in these social messages. So the source of our action doesn't come from our political ideologies. It comes from our faith and how it's being um, presented in how we see the world as Christians.
Nick, I think the social statements are really powerful. When you're bringing an action or a new ministry in front of a congregation and they say, well, are we leading where the Synod is or where our church is? Are we out in front and we're trying to set policy? And the answer is no. In fact, the answer is we've been slow to support the position that our national church and our synod have already taken. And here's the history of all of that. So I find it very empowering that we've taken these steps.
There's a question in the chat from Kirsten. She says, I'm a long-term member of a congregation that's done sanctuary work since the persecution in El Salvador in the 1980s. Recently, for valid legal and financial reasons, our leaders refused sanctuary to members who have been with us for 9 years. How do we process this? How do we renew our commitments to accompany people in times of risk? I think this is related too to in 2019. I know the ELCA declared ourselves in 2019, I believe, a sanctuary denomination.
Yep.
I'm curious if you could say a little bit about that too.
And I think the way I understand it, because it's still a little confusing to me, because even though as a denomination we are a sanctuary denomination, but the interpretation of it and how it's implemented on the ground has been different in different regions, different synods. So basically, what I have to be more, I have to go through your specific congregation and see how we can be supportive, because whether it's through providing resources, educational resources because of this, I mean, I understand the financial reasons, and maybe we can be supportive in that aspect as well, to a certain degree. But the leader's refusal to continue to be a sanctuary is something that we can maybe shed light on, through education, through information, maybe a webinar, something that we can, as Amparo, try to present the actual realities and compare it to what our role as a church needs to be. And so I'd love to continue our conversation on this specifically and see how we can really be helpful in going back to being a sanctuary denomination. I mean, sanctuary congregation.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is that to this question of how do we process this, how do we renew our commitments, I think the answer has to be in community and within a broad denomination, there are congregations who are leading the way in this, and there are congregations that are stepping back. And so this is a constant conversation, but it's also not just the ELCA. There are ecumenical, interfaith, other civil society allies who are really stepping up in sharing information and resources. And I know my work in the Washington, D.C. space is really strengthened by being part of broad coalitions who share some of the same values and goals. And so while I don't know what those would be in your specific context, I know that almost wherever you are in the United States, there are groups and there are individuals who are really active in that welcoming work. And like Raed said, sometimes reaching out, to those of us in this work or others can help make those connections if you don't have them yet.
Kate, I'm curious, you mentioned that increasingly, and this has been true for a while, but increasingly immigration gets framed through this kind of not national emergency, but national security lens.
Yeah.
Is that why it seems like did Congress at one point like have more of a hand in immigration policy? It seems like now it's almost entirely in the hands of the White House or the administration. Is that because it's being framed through that national security lens? Are there still ways that Congress can hold the White House accountable in this? What are you finding?
Yeah, there are still ways. And I just point to two shifts. So one is, I think there's never been a time in American history where we have treated immigrants well, where we have gotten everything right. But there was a substantial shift where originally the part of the US government that was overseeing who got to come into the country was under the Commerce Department. It was seen as an economic issue. Post 9/11, what that did to our whole, country's way of thinking, there was the creation in 2002 of the Department of Homeland Security. Immigration moves under that. And suddenly you're not seen as a potential economic asset or drain, or however that conversation is framed. You're seen as a potential terrorist or threat that needs to be screened against. So I think that reshuffling of the administration really, it comes out of that shift of tone and then reinforces the shift in tone. And as to Congress's role, immigration is split up into all these different congressional committees. There's the congressional judiciary committees that set immigration law, that says who can come in, what visa pathways. But then there's the Homeland Security committees that oversee immigration enforcement. And I think that's really where we're seeing the shift, where prior even to this year, while there were still really people detained and deported in ways that devastated communities, that was much less frequent, that those deportations were more likely to be someone that had entered a few months ago. Whereas now we're seeing people detained and deported who have called the US home for years and decades. So that shift in how immigration agents are choosing to enforce the laws, that is coming from the administration. But the Congress still has a role in setting guardrails and holding the administration to the laws by saying, okay, even though legally you may detain someone, they still have this due process, a right to a trial, a right to an attorney, a right to fair treatment while they're in detention. And so that's where the oversight role comes in. And Congress can still change the laws, for example, by offering a legal pathway to permanent residency or to citizenship that would make those people ineligible for detention, if that makes sense. So absolutely still really important to be calling on Congress to uphold their role and pass laws to keep so many of our neighbors safe.
That's good to hear, because I think sometimes the feeling can be, well, Congress can't even hold these folks accountable, and it can feel a little hopeless, but to know that there's still a role for Congress to play is huge.
Yeah.
Alana has a, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say one thing advocates can do is just remind your members of Congress that, hey, I'm expecting this from you.
That's right. Yeah. Alana has a question. They say I'm part of a congregation that's, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to read it out.
Oh, great. Please.
Grassroots work. How do we make connections with Amparo to share resources? We're struggling with people who need legal help but have weak asylum cases. We would love to have partnership to help find other resources. I don't know what you think, Raed, but I would suggest maybe send us an email when we can put our emails in, and then we can connect with Mary Campbell, the director, and resources that you already have and get you on the Amparo listserv if you aren't on that yet. Does that sound right, Raed?
Absolutely. And also we can look around, we see we have other companions in the area that we could connect you with that could be supportive in this, lawyers, any people who could provide legal help, and we'll definitely be able to help with that. So yeah, those are our emails. Please get in touch with us and we would definitely help with that. This is what we do. This is why we're here, and this is why we're hoping to connect with you to specifically tackle these types of questions.
Our presenters, to Kate and Raed, thank you so much for your work. I hope you know that in synods and congregations across the country that we're praying for you and your ministry and the folks that you're working with, and just are incredibly grateful that you could be here with us today, and look forward to being in partnership with y'all more and more.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it, this
Please do.
opportunity.
Yeah, thank you again. Please do reach out with any questions.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Peace.